Hi everyone. Today I'll be talking about some of our core constitutional rights and a few of the most common misconceptions that people have about them. The first one is freedom of religion. The First Amendment guarantees two main protections for religion. First, the Establishment Clause, which means the government can't create, endorse, or favor any religion. And second, the Free Exercise Clause, which gives us the right to practice any faith or none at all. A common misconception is that separation of church and state means religion must be totally removed from public life. That's not true. It just means that government can't force or promote any religion. The next is freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is one of the most recognized rights and also one of the most misunderstood. The First Amendment protects almost all speech, even if it's offensive or unpopular. However, there are a few exceptions, things like incitement to violence, true threats, or obscenity that aren't protected. The main idea is to allow open discussion without government interference. A misconception people often have is thinking free speech means you can say whatever you want without any consequences. But that's not the case. The First Amendment protects you from government punishment, not from consequences at work, school, or online. The following is freedom of the press. The freedom of the press allows journalists and media outlets to keep citizens informed and hold the government accountable. The First Amendment prohibits prior restraint, which means the government can't stop a story from being published before its release, except in very rare national security situations. A common misconception is that the government can ban or censor fake news. In reality, that would violate freedom of the press. Even controversial or unpopular reporting is protected because the press's role is to inform, not to please. The next is search and seizure, the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government, which means law enforcement usually needs a warrant or probable cause to search someone's property. There are some exceptions, like if you give consent, if something is in plain view, or if an emergency situation, police can act without a warrant. A common misconception here is that the police always needs a warrant, but that isn't true. Um, but their actions must still be justifiable and reasonable under the law. The next is due process of law. Due process means that the government has to act fairly and follow proper legal procedures before taking away someone's life, liberty, or property. It's found in both the Fifth and 14th Amendments. There are two types: procedural due process, which means the government must follow fair steps, and substantive due process, which protects certain basic rights like privacy or family decisions. A misconception is that due process only applies to criminal cases, but it also protects people in civil situations like property rights or government benefits. The following is the Ninth Amendment. The Ninth Amendment is one that doesn't get much attention, but it's really important. It basically says that just because a right isn't written down in the Constitution doesn't mean it doesn't exist. This protects what we call unenumerated rights, like the right to privacy. A common misconception is that if a right isn't listed, it doesn't exist. But the Ninth Amendment proves that the Constitution was never meant to limit our freedoms to only what's written on paper. The 10th Amendment deals with the balance of power between the states and the federal government. It says that any powers not given to the federal government are reserved for the states or the people. That's why states can create their own laws on issues not directly covered by federal law. This is very important. The Supreme Clause means that if state and federal laws conflict, the federal law always wins. A common misconception is that states can ignore or override federal laws, but that's not true. For example, some states have legalized marijuana, but it's still technically illegal under federal law. The following is equal protection. The Equal Protection Clause says that states have to treat individuals equal under the law. It's the foundation for many civil rights cases that challenge discrimination and unfair laws. Equal protection doesn't mean everyone is treated exactly the same. It just means any legal differences must be fair and justified. A common misconception is that equal protection guarantees identical treatment in all situations, but in reality, it's about preventing unjust discrimination, not removing all distinctions. The final one is discrimination. Discrimination laws make sure that people can't be treated unfairly based on race, gender, religion, or national origin. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 is the most important law in this area. It banned discrimination in employment, education, and public areas. A common misconception is that discrimination has to be intentional to be illegal, but that's not always the case. If a policy disproportionately affects a certain group, it can still violate civil rights laws. Even in today, issues like gender identity, disability, access, and systematic inequality show that civil rights are still evolving and relevant. Thank you for listening.